Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
I'm Kim Flottam.
And I'm Kirsten Trainor.
Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Sherry. We really appreciate our sponsor support. They help make all of this happen and provide us the ability to expand and grow, as you will see in the coming months. With that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. And while you're there, check out Bee Culture's Beekeeping Your First 3 Years, a quarterly magazine for beginning beekeepers. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinators. Learn more in our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor and today's guest co-host Kirsten Trainor, and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with the number 2. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. We're glad you're here because we've got a great show lined up for you today. But more on that in a minute. Hey, Kim. Hey, Kirsten. How y'all doing?
Doing okay, Jeff. I'm getting ready for Turkey Day with none of my family.
I'm in shock. I just got back from very cool Germany to very hot Arizona, and my body is still adjusting.
Yeah, how are your sinuses?
Sinuses at the moment have been fine, so it's pretty dry out here.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, and then the flight was well, and how was that international travel in these days of COVID?
Well, I had the joy of having my flight canceled because British Airways stopped all flights between London and Phoenix. And so I couldn't get a flight out of Berlin and had an extra 4-hour train ride to add on to my day. So I could fly out of Frankfurt. I mean, I could have flown via Berlin, but then I would have had to go to another country, and I was a little worried I might get grounded. So I had a very long Sunday.
I guess. Oh, amazing.
Sounds horrible.
So, yeah, I started I got up at 5:30 in the morning in Germany, and I got into Arizona at 10:30-ish p.m. So add 8 hours onto that, and then you understand my day.
That really does make for a long day. Hey, Kim, your former employer, Bee Culture, had a What's the Buzz about honeybee viruses and vaccines. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, you got a chance to read that, huh?
Yeah.
That was good. That was really good. I'm impressed. Vaccinating a colony so that the queen passes antibodies into her eggs and onto her population. That's a pretty amazing feat, in my opinion. Maybe a game changer? Kirsten, what do you think about that?
I will have to see how it goes. I mean, there's lots of honeybee viruses. We may need multiple vaccinations, I guess.
That sounds familiar today.
Yeah.
All things considered, vaccine is one of the more popular words at the moment.
It most definitely is. Actually, it's pretty cool because the second corona vaccine that came out was developed by Turkish immigrants in Germany, and so it's quite a lovely story of success by immigrants moving into a country.
Oh, good. Neat. Okay. Well, I hope one or both of them work soon.
So, well, the efficacy rates have been amazing from what they're reporting, so I'm pretty impressive.
No, we're talking about the COVID virus at this point. We're not talking about the queen. We're not talking about the queen.
Well, I mean,
virus.
It would be amazing if the queen vaccine will stop your colony from picking up AFB 94% of the time.
Yeah.
That would be impressive too.
Kirsten, I'm kind of excited about the guests that you have today. Calvin Ernst. I'm familiar with the Ernst company because when I was with Bee Culture, we had a big pollinator garden on site. And one of the first people we got up there was the Ernst Seed company because they advertised in the magazine, and we gave them a chance to show off. So this was kind of neat. It was Old Home Week listening to this today.
Yeah, he's a what a lovely gentleman to talk with. His knowledge is vast, and the way the company has shifted with the times, I find very impressive.
All right, really good. Well, I'm looking forward to that interview. Hey, Kim, with all this COVID, you've had quite a bit of time sitting at home to read, haven't you?
I have. Jeff, I got a copy of Rob Page's new book. The title is The Art of the Bee, Shaping the Environment from Landscapes to Societies. I don't know if you know, Rob Page and I were at the Madison Bee Lab way back when. I just graduated and started working there, and he moved there from, I don't remember where he was before he moved to Madison, but we spent some time there, got to him a little bit. Then he moved on and I moved on, and we both ended up in the bee world, of course. He went to UC Davis and then to Arizona, and I went to a whole bunch of other places and ended up here. So what I'm going to do, I got this book review. I got through it. It's a work. It's a lot of work. He's very entertaining, but there's a lot of information in it. So here goes. We aren't so different, bees and humans. The elements of our social structures and how they come about have many similarities. Our individual behavior has been shaped by selection on our social structures over thousands of millennia, shaping us to fit the structures that are optimal for the environments we are in. Our adaptive responses to changes in our environment are likewise similar. When resources are abundant, bees are very docile. But when they aren't, colonies transfer into militarized societies. The defenses go up. Immigration services tighten up the entrance. Their border control, guard bees, increase in number in their overzealous desire to keep out unwanted immigrants. This phrase is paraphrased, actually, from the very last page of the epilogue of Page's book. The 210 pages covering 9 chapters that precede this explains how he got his conclusion in the very beginning, practical and, yes, even entertaining manner, in 9 very different but very focused chapters. Environmental artists, he begins, of both bees and plants, describes the ongoing coevolution of both to meet the needs of the other, and the evolution of behavior of both to meet the needs of both, so both can adapt to ever-changing resources. Then he looks at the role of bees as environmental engineers to construct the niches they live in, each such as the nests they construct. And when looking at the social structure or social order, he describes this group as having special guilds and brings in the contributions of Aristotle, Huber, Darwin, and Rousseau, all who made observations about building, defending, fitness, developmental, biology, and perfect home construction. Without being taught or directed, bees are shaped to a degree by what part of the nest they are born in and where they spend their time patrolling and when they stop patrolling and fly. And one of the things, Jeff, that I didn't realize is how much time bees do spend patrolling. A lot of their life is just checking out stuff inside the nest in a very relatively confined part of the nest. They're not all over. They are born in a place and they stay in a place, and where they're born kind of defines who they're going to be. Then Page goes on, the superorganism, cooperation, Darwin's theory, and the internal communication that is always ongoing, not unlike, he compares, to our hormones, like organs and systems in humans. And then the requirements of a body or a colony to be considered a superorganism, comparing and contrasting and more alike than not. Rob was involved in an evolution experiment for 23 years, studying pollen storage amounts, artificially selecting for high and low pollen storage behaviors. From the action of a gene to the formation of complex social interactions, high pollen selections would store up to 20 times more pollen than the low pollen collectors. One difference noticed was the number of ovules between the two and the different length of life. And then the behavior and biology of drones and mating with virgin queens. A colony left to its own devices and average health produces something like 20,000 drones in a season. Yet only 1 or 2 per 1,000 will actually get to mate with a queen. That's how he put it. huge in comparison and producing more sperm by far than a queen will need. Meanwhile, queens are built to ensure diversity in a colony population by how the sperm they've gathered is mixed from multiple matings during a flight and what that first egg becomes. It, says Page, becomes a small part, the first cell of something much larger and more complex. Organized for reproduction, nutrition, protection with coordinated action of its many parts capable of responding to its environment and of making decisions. A superorganism. Mark Winston noted that this work inspires us to ponder our own place in nature and within our human societies. That is what you will do when you complete this task. Jeff, you get a chance to pick up this book. It's worth the time.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Kim, I got that book. It's sitting there on my bookshelf. I'm ready to read it, and your reviews is helping me to want to get right into it. Hey, let's get to Kirsten's interview with Calvin Ernst and Ernst Seed Company. But before that, let's listen to a quick word from Strong Microbials.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbials Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Calvin Ernst of Ernst Conservation Seed, who started the family business in the 1960s, growing crown vetch seed for erosion control after learning that the Department of Transportation couldn't find a seed supplier. Since then, the business has refocused on growing natives of the East Coast. Calvin, thank you for agreeing to speak with me, and welcome to the show.
Hello, nice to be on this show, and I appreciate the historical aspect that you're wanting to develop into this discussion.
Well, I mean, crown vetch is a crop bees love, and it's always nice to see how a company got its start and how it has changed with the times. So you got started in planting at a pretty young age, teaming up with your brother and convincing your father to let you plant on 5 acres. How did you first become interested in growing crown vetch?
Well, let me go back a little further. So the connection with my parents. My parents always loved the garden, and then when I was in 4-H, which would have been when I was only a young or less than a teenager, I grew pine tree seedlings for sale, and so that was sort of my introduction to being in plant production. I had a nursery license from the state when I was 14 years old. So I have an early history of being in growing and selling things. And even I've talked to a few people lately recalling how when I would go to high school, I would make arrangements to take 5 or 6 bushels of tomatoes or string beans with me in the morning for the cafeteria. So my history of growing things and selling things, it has a long tail. Yeah.
So you were always interested in making a buck off what you could grow in the backyard.
That is correct, yes. And so those same 5 acres then eventually became a crown vetch patch.
Okay. And you have recently switched, well, not recently, for many decades already, you've switched over to growing only native seed stocks. What brought about that transformation?
Well, there's one of the things that really happened there is biologists were recognizing the distinct advantage of 2 or 3 plant communities. The one mainly being the wetlands in our country to keep water clean and purified. Also the the prairies which were being removed for agricultural production in the Midwest. And similarly, the prairies in the Pennsylvania, for instance, that were remnant prairies, not large areas, but they also had, and I started recognizing them as I traveled and studied forestry and things like that they were very important. And so I thought, well, I guess one of the things that helped me get into the natives is PennDOT had asked me if I could find some cosmos sedge. And I, having enough botany background, I knew where there were some, and I picked a lunchbox full of, when I was harvesting corn, I knew some place at the end of the row I could find some sedges, and so cosmos sedge, and so I picked a small lunch bag full of cosmos sedge. I took it to the DOT people that had also been Crown Vetch customers, and they said, well, how much do you have to have for that? And I said, well, $20. Now, this is when $20 was really $20. And
right.
So I thought that's much better than growing corn. You've got to start growing sedges and rushes, and so that developed. I mean, my business sort of started around that, and then I realized that when different environmental groups or incentives were put on restoring wetlands and developing retention basins and stuff like that. So the most of my early natives were in the wetland species.
Okay.
Yes, and then even for developing strip mine land or for restoring strip mine land, I would sell them Tioga deer tongue, which was developed by the USDA. They'd also had the Crown Vetch at Big Flats, New York. And so I thought, oh, that's an alternative to growing Crown Vetch or corn. And so that was the first native that I grew extensively, other than harvesting these sedges from some wild areas to get started in the natives. But then by about 1990, the demand for Crown Vetch was really diminishing rapidly. And I had these few years of experience growing natives. So I really started expanding that to grow like Ohio spiderwort and some more of the upland species like oxeye sunflower and the desmodiums.
And so it sounds like you got your start with the Department of Transportation, and they've been pretty forward thinking in many pollinator restoration projects these days. You hear a lot about them putting in byways for forage as well.
Yeah, that has been a strong emphasis of our business is to try to understand and supply what highway departments need throughout eastern United States.
Okay, and I mean that's a big client, and they probably have lots of demands on quality and quantity.
Yes,
so I'm sure that keeps you hopping. So early on in the late 60s, you went into collaboration with Multi-Systems, Inc. to plant Crown Vetch in Nebraska, and this required you plowing under about 640 acres of prairie. I'm sure with the way your business has shifted, you would have other ideas for such a plot today. What did prairie lands look like back then, and why is it important to conserve their plant species?
Well, you have to understand that the sand hills in Nebraska in this period of history were very overgrazed, and some of the remnant species were rather hard to find within this square mile of land that I bought to grow Crown Vetch. However, one of the things that really has surprised me, because it had never been plowed before, there were places where the sod houses had been built in the 1880s, and they still remained some of the walls and stuff of them. And I'm thinking, if that sod was that good then, this is really amazing. So that sort of encouraged me to think more about natives at that time. And now this was 1970 that I started farming in Nebraska. So The reason I had to go with multi-systems is the demand for crown vetch was so great that conventional farm loans were not available for such with an unknown demand, a crop with an unknown demand or a sporadic demand. And so I got some venture capital people to work with me under the name of multi-systems.
Okay. And so how has your work these days been for prairie restoration? You've assisted, for example, the Xerces Society and seed mixes as well. What has your work along those lines been?
Well, the working with the pollinator. So I as I started saying here about the wetlands, and then the pollinator aspect of this occurred to us more in the 90s, 1990s, as the attention or the recognition that butterflies were diminishing, honeybees were diminishing, and many other pollinators. And I really don't want to just emphasize those two species, honeybees or butterflies. There are thousands of other pollinator families and that run from many insects and ways of pollinating. And so I have tried to put together mixes that replicate those kind of environments where I would see in nature where wildlife was common, like where you would see butterflies or where you would see these other bees other than just honeybees. And that of course is the Xerces is one of several organizations that are emphasizing the restoration of habitat.
Right. And so you say that when you're working on these seed mixes, you really try to replicate what you would find in pollinator-rich environments. So what goes into the development of a seed mix? Where do you start? What are you looking for? How do you figure out what percentage of seeds to put in?
Well, so there's several questions there. Questions. The biggest point is that as we look at as a natural environment, I have a sort of a knack to I learn which species are easiest to grow. Let's say that we see milkweed or something like that we want to have in the mix real well, but now there's a few of the milkweed species are much harder to grow than others. So when we're making a mix, we try to make it based on what we can grow. Also, that then we have to. Well, we combine that with our knowledge of what good habitats for pollinators look like, and so and then the other thing is, in order to sell something, it has to have a good appearance. So even though there might be some flowers that do some pollinating value, if they don't look good, if they're not appealing to your eye, then you're just not going to get into growing them, and there's not going to be the demand for them.
Yeah, and you end up with disappointed customers because you have to put some visual appeal in there as well.
And you said a little bit about what percentage or whatever, like it would be easy to put in a lot of black-eyed Susan and people would have a bright yellow habitat for a short period of time, and 1 or 2% of black-eyed Susan in a wildflower mix can dominate it. Where we try to balance our mixes so that no one species takes over, and so that we end up with a diversity in the long run of what we're hoping to achieve. And so 1 or 2%, let's say, even of something like the mountain mints, which are several million seeds per pound or 100,000 of seed per pound. Then you have something else like a senna, which is a much larger seed, which is in the legume family and has pea-like size seeds. You have to really balance those numbers, and it doesn't take very many ounces of the very small seed to match what you want to accomplish.
Right. Well, and I'm sure you also have to give thought if it's supposed to be all season long that it's providing nectar and pollen. How do you get something blooming from April all the way through September? That's quite a lot of calculation that has to go into that.
Yes, and then a lot of course, we know when our production blooms, but also we've actually gone and chosen plants so that we do meet those requirements and of being early and late, and so we do have blooms throughout the whole year. And sometimes it's even hard to get something that is adequate for pollinators in the middle of the summer when both ends are almost easier than the middle.
Beekeepers know this very well. There's that summer dearth where things just kind of stop.
Yes.
So
it does.
You've often been ahead of the curve in your ideas, switching both crops and practices before it became trendy. How do you know when it's time to shift course? And so how do you end up staying ahead of the competition?
Well, I wrote down a little note here, call it supply and demand. So if we see something and we like it and we start growing it, and then if we can develop a demand for it, we would increase it. For instance, like the mountain mints. There just seemed to be a wonderful demand for them. And so we've just been increasing till we grow hundreds of acres of them. Now there's some other things. Now, right now, the native big blue stems or the tall grasses are not as appealing to people. And we've actually had to cut down on the production of big blue stem and even Virginia wild rye, because the demand is not as great as our production can be. Okay. So we adjust almost every season for sure, but it seems we're adjusting all the time of what we want to plant, how many more acres or something we will plant of one crop versus another. And then it also depends on what kind of luck we have with weed control in the growth in the production field, or what kind of you might say insect damage we can have to some things. We've had like for instance, about 5 years ago, we recognized that Japanese beetles were taking over our desmodium plantings, literally just desiccating them. Well, then we really had to spray the grubs in the ground before we had pollinators to kill the grubs, so that we didn't have Japanese beetles eating all of our desmodiums. And those kind of lessons, so we have a shortage of desmodium, but we had adequate production area. So we learn those things and try to balance that with how many acres we'll plant.
And so do you grow all of the seed you sell, or do you also have other people growing for you?
We grow a majority of our seed. We manage the production of manage and encourage the production of a farm in North Carolina and one in New Jersey that help us. But then we do not grow seeds like the fescues or the bluegrasses or ryegrasses, some of those things, because they're all grown commercially in the Northwest U.S. Okay. And so we're not competitive growing them.
Sure. No, I mean, you have to know where you have an advantage and where your where your strengths lie.
And even one of the other crops that we could grow easily is Plains coreopsis, but the market is so saturated with less expensive sources that we would be wasting our time when something like the mountain mints would be so much more advantage to us economically, or no other sources of it. No adequate sources.
Does it take a while to ramp up if you want to, for example, expand mountain mint? I mean, I would imagine you have to produce quite a bit more and then get more fields into mountain mint.
It has always started with a little greenhouse grow out of a few thousand or 100 plants, and then a row of plants that would be big enough to harvest by hand for a couple years. And then we would get it a large enough tract that we could start mechanically harvesting it. sometimes with combines, sometimes with choppers, or even today, our crew is hand-picking Monarda punctata, which is one of the Monardas that's a wonderful pollinator source, but it's also a biennial, or a short-lived perennial. And so we really have to be delicate on it. Even to drive over it, we were a little afraid with our combines that we wanted. Right. So we're just hand harvesting it.
Okay. So very labor intense.
Very labor intense. Yes.
So I take it you have good crew that have been with you for years who know what they're doing.
That's one of our best assets. The people that work for us are the thing we have to keep the most. Yes.
Yeah. For any successful business, I think it's built on the people who do the labor day in and day out.
You come every morning, turn the lights on. That's right.
Better Bee is pleased to present the interviews by Kirsten Trainor. As a supplier to our nation's beekeepers for over 40 years, Better Bee provides the tools, equipment, and information you need to succeed. Through its many beekeeping employees, Better Bee serves you with solutions to your beekeeping challenges. That's why they can say with confidence that they are your partners in better beekeeping. Thanks to Better Bee for their informative catalog, website, supportive beekeeper education, and for sponsoring the series featuring Kirsten. Be sure to see the latest at betterbee.com.
So a lot of homeowners are, of course, very interested in planting for pollinators. What advice would you give to a homeowner wanting to plant a successful native wildflower garden from seed for the first time?
Okay, I think the very first thing they have to evaluate what kind of a site they have, what their shade situations are, how wet the soils are, and then I think one of probably the most crucial thing that they can do something about. They can't make their soils basically sandier or drier or wetter than they are, but is to remove the invasives. And sometimes that invasive is something as simple as a tall fescue, which they planted a few years ago, or as invasive as something like Canadian thistle or something like that they must take whether it's chemical or mechanical means, they must get that under control before they'll have very successful establishing a native meadow. I like to call them meadows in the East because they have prairies in the Midwest. So I call them meadows. And then they have to look at this thing about shade, whether if they're going to deal with shade, they need to pick a mix that is shade tolerant. The other thing they need to be thinking about is how high they're going to tolerate. In other words, they might have a damp site, but do they really want something like Joe Pye weed that's 6 feet tall? And so in their yard. Now, I am very pro converting lawns into anything other than mowed grass.
So, yes.
So that it'll handle more friendly environment or create a more friendly environment.
Yeah, I think one of the things most homeowners struggle with is the unexpected weed bank they have in their soil when they try to start something from scratch. And I know some people talk about putting cardboard down for a year and really trying to kill the area off in advance with proper prep so that when you put your seeds in, you're much more likely to have success.
Yeah, and the cardboard or plastic and those things are so excellent at controlling perennials. However, that doesn't really eradicate their seed bank of things like the foxtails or the ragweed. Now, I know ragweed is native, but it still can be very overpowering of a native stand. And so one of the other things that I really want to recommend to them as we get this site prepared by eradicating at least the perennial weeds, and then select a time of year when they can plant and expect the most rapid growth of their new native vegetation. And often that is in late spring when once the soil reaches about 55 degrees, then native plants generally will germinate rapidly and dominate the area. And then it takes some mowing or some clipping or even some hand pulling of weeds to keep the weeds out during this. The other thing that I want to mention about this is they don't need to worry that much about invasive insects, because if they have a very diverse meadow, the insect species do not seem to dominate, like I mentioned with the Japanese beetle invading the desmodiums. When they have a mixed stand, the insect damage is generally less.
Yes, I had run an article in one of my issues where somebody was saying that if you just leave the aphids alone, the parasitic wasps show up pretty darn quick.
Yes.
If you have a diverse landscape, it's when we have a very monoculture landscape that we end up with pests that are much harder to deal with because there's not an ecosystem balance.
That's a good balance. That's very important. Yes, it is. Yes, that can make it much easier to avoid the damage of one thing, or even let's say even a blight of some kind or something like that, if you have the diversity.
Right. And so once these meadows get established, is there much maintenance from year to year?
Well, the one of the things that'll happen in most of the northeast United States areas is that meadows become invaded with trees. That's sort of the climax vegetation. And so they do have to be aware of that. They do have to be aware of, as I mentioned, about the invasives. But by burning or mowing, like at least every 3 years, they can reduce tree population quite well. Sometimes the trees even need grubbed out because once they root, just mowing them will not control them.
Right.
So they're pretty difficult to keep out sometimes.
Well, especially if you end up with some of the invasive, like tree of heaven, that seems to be almost impossible to get rid of.
Yes. They can be.
Go ahead.
Once they have a seed source, if they allow a seed source of tree of heaven or something like that around them, then they're going to be fighting that for a long time.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's amazing how many seeds it drops.
Yes.
So, you wish some of our native trees would fight with so much force.
Yeah.
So what plant should every pollinator enthusiast on the East Coast add to their garden if you had to choose just one?
Well, now there you have a real easy answer. So we know that milkweeds are very important to the butterflies, but there's other species of butterflies we have to be concerned about. The butterflies, in spite of the fact that we teach our school children that milkweed is an essential thing for monarch butterflies, there are other species of butterflies that use everything. As I mentioned, the Joe Pye weed. We have the asters, the liatrices, and I want to make a special emphasis about goldenrod and asters. Goldenrods and asters, which are late in the fall, make a nutrient source or nectar source and pollen source for butterflies. And again, I'm talking more specifically about the monarchs, as they need to migrate back to Mexico, and they become a sort of a super strong monarch butterfly by eating asters and goldenrod nectar. And this is, I think, sort of an overlooked factor in the life cycle of the butterflies, is that they need those kind of nectar sources. And even though you see them attractively attending something like a thistle or something like that, and there's several native thistles that are ideal for them, but they do need this high pollen and nectar source from something like goldenrod and asters.
Are there any goldenrods that you can recommend that even look good in gardens?
Well, the one goldenrod called stiff goldenrod, and there's also showy goldenrod. Then I have another one that I really like is anise scented goldenrod, which I just took a group here the other day, and I said, what would you name this goldenrod. And I made them smell the stems and crush a few leaves. And they said, well, it smells like anise. Well, then I'd just call it anise-scented goldenrod. They had no clue because it was nice yellow field of goldenrod. And see, the people around northwestern Pennsylvania kind of consider goldenrod a nuisance because it grows up any place they don't maintain.
Right. I mean, beekeepers love it, and it's an absolutely amazing forage, especially for a lot of the bumblebees that have to overwinter and some late season bees prior to entering diapause. It's a great nectar and pollen source.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So and unfortunately people confuse it with ragweed, and so it always gets blamed for allergies, and it has nothing to do with allergies. So
that's a very important thought to keep in front of people. Yes.
So you've been in this business a lot of years, and your children are also involved. What kind of changes do you think we will see in the next 2 decades when it comes to native seeds?
Well, I think the one thing that we're sort of constantly dealing with is the approach of ecotypes and how narrow of a range that we should be growing things for. And I tell people this: I do not grow bananas and palm trees in Pennsylvania. So that's the extreme. You see what I mean? By being that extreme. However, there might be a mountain mint that's quite well adapted to a certain elevation in central Pennsylvania, but it still might do well in the coastal parts of New Jersey or something like that. So I see that. But here's why I'm saying this about what species and trying to talk about ecotypes is the worst thing about a small ecotype source is having enough seed to do an adequate restoration with that species. Now, if you have a specific thing that you want to restore and there's a local seed source of it, that's the way to do it. It's not going to be a commercial seed producer like ourselves. Right. Whereas we're going to try to produce things that make the matrix of the meadow, like the goldenrods or asters or the laatruses or some of those things. And then these really specialty species will have to be located and added by the local by whatever restoration type project it is.
Okay. Yeah. So, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me. The one question I ask everybody, and it's a little unfair since you're a plant guy and not a pollinator person, but if you had to choose a pollinator to represent you online, what pollinator would you pick?
New England aster.
The New England aster, the plant.
The plant.
All right. Okay, you're going with a plant. Fair enough.
Oh, you meant what insect? Well, no. Yep. Yeah. Well, I guess.
It can be a hummingbird. It doesn't have to be an insect.
We don't have many hummingbirds, but I do like to see bumblebees in our crops also. So
okay,
I'm not biased, but anything that eats New England aster. I thought you was thinking maybe a plant. Yeah, you're right. I'm thinking plants all the time.
Well, this is why you're in plants. I'm New England aster is what we'll assign to you then.
Okay.
So Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. Is there anything else that I should have asked that I didn't that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, you're so welcome, though, to communicate with me at any time. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Same here. Yes.
Thanks a lot for that, Kirsten. That was a great interview.
Oh, my pleasure. He was a joy to speak with. I really enjoyed going and learning about the company history and also all his advice on planting.
Yeah, I'm going to take a half a step back. I liked his response to your question about what would you like to be, and he said a New England aster, and I couldn't think of a better bee plant to be. That was absolutely wonderful, and he did good. You said about planting. I come from a horticulture background, and what he was talking about getting rid of weeds and especially invasives before you start this, that's the biggest problem most people have is they think they can just do it and it'll be wonderful. And a couple of years preparation before you start is always a good idea, and he laid that out pretty well, I thought.
Oh, real good. Anything else, Kirsten?
I just want to wish everybody a really great Thanksgiving week. And if you're traveling, stay safe on those roads, and thank a bee for all the lovely goodies on your Thanksgiving table.
Couldn't have said that better. Stay safe, folks.
Yep. Well, that about wraps it up for this podcast. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote really helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of the Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We also want to thank Strong Microbials for becoming the latest supporter of this podcast. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. We want to also thank Better Bee for supporting Kirsten in her interviews. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtoday.podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, folks?
I think about wraps it up, Jeff.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving.